I had no clue that one small decision would unravel my entire world. You see, I trusted Laura, I really did. We'd been together for nearly 8 years, and while things weren't perfect, I thought we were solid. So when she told me she was heading to a surprise birthday party for our neighbor Dave, I didn't think twice. But as I sat at home that night, something gnawed at me, like a tiny voice whispering that something was off. I couldn't ignore it, so I did something completely out of character. I got in my car and drove over to see for myself. I wasn't expecting to find anything strange, just a bunch of people from Dave's office having a good time. But when I looked through that window, what I saw made my heart drop. There was my wife, standing way too close to a guy I'd never seen before. His hands on her waist, and she was smiling at him in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in a long, long time. In an instant, everything I thought I knew about my life changed. What would you do if the person you trusted most turned out to be someone you barely recognized? If you want to hear how I confronted the truth and the fallout that followed, keep listening, because this is just the beginning of a story that flipped my entire life upside down. So, on a whim, I decided to drive by Dave's place, just to see for myself. I didn't expect to find anything out of the ordinary, just figured I'd see a few folks hanging around, and that'd be that. But what I actually saw? Well, I'm still struggling to wrap my head around it. When I pulled up to Dave's house, I could hear the faint sound of music and laughter drifting through the night. It seemed like your typical house party, but as I got closer to the front door, something made me freeze in my tracks. Through the living room window, I spotted Laura standing way too close to some other guy. His hands were resting on her hips, and she was smiling at him, really smiling, in a way I hadn't seen her smile at me in ages. My heart dropped like a lead weight. In that instant, I knew something was seriously wrong. But instead of turning around, I walked right in. I didn't care that I wasn't invited. The moment I stepped through the doorway, the whole room went dead silent. Every head turned in my direction, and Laura's face drained of color. She clearly wasn't expecting me to show up. No one was. "Mark," she blurted, her voice trembling. Her eyes were wide with shock. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I looked at her, then shifted my gaze to the guy she'd been standing with. He was doing everything he could to avoid making eye contact, looking like a deer caught in headlights. I took a deep breath, trying to keep a lid on the anger boiling inside me. "I thought I'd drop by and see what kind of surprise party this really is," I said, keeping my tone level but icy. You could cut the tension in the room with a knife. No one knew what to say, and Laura just stood there, rooted to the spot. The guy she'd been with tried to blend into the crowd, easing himself away, but it was too late. My eyes were locked on him, and he knew it. He looked like he couldn't decide whether to stay put or make a break for it, but either way, it was clear I wasn't pleased. I took a step closer to Laura, keeping my voice steady but firm. "You want to tell me what's going on, Laura?" I asked. She swallowed hard, darting glances between me and the guy next to her. "Mark, it's not what it looks like," she blurted out, her voice trembling. "Really?" I shot back, a bitter laugh escaping my throat as I crossed my arms over my chest. "Because it sure as hell looks exactly like what it seems." My words dripped with sarcasm. "You're here with him, cozying up like it's no big deal, while I'm sitting at home thinking you're at some surprise party." "Some surprise, huh?" The people who'd been casually sipping drinks and chatting just a few moments ago were now frozen in place, looking as if they'd been turned to stone. No one dared to move or make a sound. It was obvious they were just as stunned as I was, and honestly, they probably had no clue how to react. This definitely wasn't the type of scene they'd expected when they showed up at Dave's house tonight. Laura's lips quivered as she tried to muster up something to say. "It's just a misunderstanding," she finally whispered, but I wasn't buying it. "A misunderstanding?" I barked back, my voice climbing a notch with each word. "You're here, wrapped up with this guy, and you want me to believe it's nothing? Mark, please, she pleaded, her face turning crimson as her voice cracked under the pressure. Let's go home and talk about this. Not here. Not in front of everyone. I could feel every single set of eyes glued to me, the weight of their stares pressing down on my chest like 1,000 pounds. It was suffocating, but I wasn't about to back down. I needed answers, and I wasn't waiting until we were behind closed doors to get them. No, I said firmly, shaking my head. We're going to settle this right here, right now. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing that things were only going to get uglier from here. Laura looked like she wanted to disappear, but there was no escaping this. I wasn't letting her walk away without confronting what she'd done. The guy, let's call him Mike, though I still didn't know his real name, stepped forward, raising his hands as if trying to calm things down. Hey man, let's not blow this out of proportion. It's really not. I cut him off with a glare so sharp it could have cut through steel. You don't get to say a damn word right now. I'm talking to my wife. He clamped his mouth shut instantly, and honestly, that was probably the smartest decision he'd made all evening. Laura's eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I've been a fool, haven't I? I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and betrayal. Sitting at home, trusting you, while you've been out here doing this. Mark, please. She reached out to touch me, desperation in her voice, but I stepped back, refusing to let her lay a finger on me. It's not serious, she stammered, her voice barely more than a whisper. It didn't mean anything. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not serious. It was almost worse than a slap across the face. It didn't mean anything. Her words rang in my ears, echoing around in my skull, but I couldn't make any sense of them. If it really meant nothing, then why did she hide it from me? Why was she here with him, wrapped up like they were the only two people in the world? If it didn't mean anything, I asked, my voice icy cold, then why are we standing here right now? Why did I have to find out this way? She didn't have an answer. Of course, she didn't. The truth was out in the open now, and there was no stuffing it back into the shadows. The party guests, still rooted to their spots, wore expressions ranging from stunned disbelief to something that looked a lot like pity. And then it hit me, some of them might have known all along. That thought twisted my stomach into a knot. Laura wiped at her eyes, struggling to keep herself from breaking down right there in front of everyone. But I wasn't moved by her tears anymore. Those tears used to mean something, used to make me want to wrap my arms around her and promise everything would be okay. Not anymore. She'd made her choices, and now she'd have to face the consequences. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking under the weight of those words. I trusted you more than anyone in my whole life. And this is how you repay me. By sneaking around behind my back. By lying to me every single day. I'm sorry, she whispered, so softly I could barely hear her. It sounded almost like she didn't believe it herself. Sorry. I let out a bitter laugh, hollow and sharp. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you've been lying to me for, who knows how long. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Mike still hovering near the door, probably wishing he was anywhere but here. He didn't say a word, just stood there looking like a deer caught in headlights. It was a mistake, Laura stammered, her voice trembling as she shot a quick glance in his direction. I didn't mean for it to happen. I looked at her, searching for any sign of the woman I thought I'd married, but all I saw was a stranger who had made choices I could never forgive. I shook my head slowly, feeling the last threads of trust unravel and fall away. I'm done, I said quietly, but with a finality that rang through the room. We're done. The room fell eerily silent. Even the music had stopped at some point, leaving nothing but the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Laura reached out for me one last time, desperation written all over her face. Mark, please. Don't do this. But it was too late. My mind was already made up. I turned around and walked out of that house, leaving her there with her regrets, her lies, and the mess she'd created. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, but instead of stinging, it felt almost refreshing. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I didn't feel weighed down by deceit or betrayal. I felt free. Even if it meant walking away from the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with. Leaving Laura and that party behind was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most necessary. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, rage, grief, disbelief. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind, over and over, trying to pinpoint the moment it all started falling apart. How long had she been deceiving me? How many nights had she slipped away to meet Mike, pretending she was at a work event or out with friends? The more I dwelled on it, the deeper that knife seemed to twist. It was like the longer I sat there, replaying everything in my head, the more it all clicked into place. I'd been blind to all the warning signs, the late nights, the sudden need for secrecy, the growing distance between us. It was all right in front of me, practically screaming for attention. But I chose not to see it. Maybe I couldn't handle the truth back then, or maybe I just didn't want to admit it. I knew I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every corner, every room, was filled with painful reminders of what we used to be and what she had shattered with her betrayal. So, I packed up what I could and left. I found myself a small, bare-bones apartment on the other side of town, far enough that I wouldn't have to worry about bumping into her or stumbling onto fragments of our old life together. For weeks, I didn't talk to anyone. How could I? I had no idea how to explain what had happened. How was I supposed to look my friends and family in the eye and tell them that the woman I'd been married to for nearly a decade had stabbed me in the back like that? I wasn't ready to deal with their sympathy, or worse, their judgment. So I kept my distance. But after a while, the silence grew unbearable. It was like the loneliness was crushing me from the inside out. I had to talk to someone, even if it was just to hear my own voice again. That's when I picked up the phone and called Dave, my best friend. We hadn't spoken in weeks. He knew something was up, he'd been calling, texting, trying to reach me any way he could. I just wasn't ready to face the fact that my marriage had come crashing down in such a humiliating way. But now, sitting in that empty apartment, I knew I needed someone who'd understand. Dave was the only person I could talk to. As soon as he picked up, he didn't waste a second. "Dude, where the hell have you been? I've been trying to get a hold of you for weeks. What's going on?" There was no point dancing around it. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the words that still tasted bitter in my mouth. "Laura's been cheating on me." The line went quiet. For a few seconds, I wondered if he'd heard me. Then, his voice came back, low and full of shock. "What? Are you serious? Laura?" "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing a hand over my face. "I caught her. At a party. With some guy. I think his name's Mike or something." Dave let out a low whistle. "Man, I don't even know what to say. That's seriously messed up." "Yeah, it is," I replied, my voice raw and shaky. "But it's not just messed up, Dave. It's wrecked everything." So I told him everything. How I walked in on them. How Laura tried to brush it off, like it was no big deal. How it felt like my entire world crumbled in that one single moment. Dave stayed quiet, only cutting in now and then to throw in a few choice words when I got to the worst parts. When I finally finished, there was a long, heavy silence before Dave spoke again, his tone thoughtful and serious. "So, what's the plan now? What are you going to do?" "I moved out," I said, exhaustion seeping through every syllable. "I just couldn't stay in that house. Too many memories. Too much pain." "Good," he said firmly. "You don't need to be anywhere near her right now. You need space." "I know," I agreed, letting out a long sigh. But I don't know what to do next. Should I file for divorce? Should I try to talk to her again? I can't even look at her without feeling sick. Dave didn't even hesitate. Mark, you can't go back, Dave said, his voice calm and steady. She crossed a line, man. And once that line is crossed, there's no undoing it. Trust me, I've seen it happen before. You've got to start thinking about what's best for you now. His words hit me hard because, deep down, I knew he was right. There was no fixing this. Laura had made her decision, and now it was time for me to make mine. I know, I muttered, barely loud enough to hear myself. I'm not sure I'm ready to let go yet. But after that conversation, I realized I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. I had to face the truth about what my life had turned into and figure out what to do next. Divorce felt like admitting defeat, like I'd somehow failed. But staying with Laura, knowing what she'd done, felt even worse. A few days later, I got a text from her. It was the first time I'd heard from her since that night at the party. Can we talk? Please. I miss you. I stared at the message for what seemed like an eternity. Part of me still craved answers, but another part just wanted to shut the door on her for good. In the end, my need for closure won out. I had to hear what she had to say, even if I knew deep down it wouldn't change anything. We agreed to meet at a small cafe, somewhere neutral where the weight of our shared memories wouldn't suffocate me. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting by the window, looking worn down, exhausted, like the guilt had been gnawing away at her. Mark, she said softly as I slid into the seat across from her. Thank you for coming. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, waiting for her to speak, to say whatever it was she felt she needed to get off her chest. She fidgeted with the napkin on the table, twisting it in her hands. I know I messed up, she began, her voice shaking. I've been thinking about everything, and I don't know how to make it right. I didn't flinch. There's no making this right, Laura, I said, my voice coming out colder than I intended. You made your choice. She winced at my words but didn't try to argue. She knew I was right. There was no sugarcoating it. I wasn't happy, she admitted, her eyes filling with tears. I didn't mean for it to happen, Mark. It just did. I shook my head slowly, feeling that familiar anger simmering again. That's not an excuse. You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were unhappy. But instead, you chose to go behind my back. I know, she whispered, her tears spilling over now. I know I should have come to you. I didn't know how. I sighed, rubbing my temples, trying to keep my composure. Laura, do you even want to fix this? Because I don't know if I can. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw real fear in them. She didn't have an answer, at least not one that came easily. I want to try, she said finally, after what felt like a lifetime, her voice barely steady. But I understand if you don't. And that was the moment it hit me, there was no saving us. Even if she wanted to try, even if she was willing to put in the effort, I couldn't. I couldn't go back. The trust was shattered, and there was no putting those pieces back together again. The trust was gone, and the love I once had for her wasn't enough to overcome what she'd done. I think it's over, Laura, I said quietly. I don't think we can come back from this. Her head dropped, and her shoulders started to shake as she sobbed. But watching her break down didn't stir up any sympathy in me, just a dull sense of finality. It was really over. Walking away from Laura for the second time was both easier and harder than I expected. Easier because I'd already made up my mind. Harder because, this time, it felt like the end of something that could never be repaired. There were no more what-ifs, no lingering doubts about whether we could piece things back together. We couldn't. And that was that. The next week, I filed for divorce. It was a clean break. We had no kids to complicate things, no drawn-out battles over property or finances. Just the end of a chapter that had taken nearly 10 years to write. With no major assets to fight over, the divorce process moved along quickly. Laura didn't contest it. She knew, just like I did, that there was no point in dragging it out. The weeks that followed blurred together, a haze of legal paperwork, meetings with attorneys, and the tedious process of untangling our lives. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing, but deep down, a part of me mourned what we had lost, the life we built together and the future we once imagined. I buried myself in work, trying to fill the empty spaces left by the separation. But no matter how busy I kept myself, those quiet moments would sneak in. Late at night or in the middle of a slow afternoon, the pain would come crashing back, and I'd find myself lost in memories of what used to be. That's when Dave, being the good friend he always was, stepped in. He refused to let me sink too deep. He pulled me out of the house, made sure I reconnected with people, and little by little, I started to feel like myself again. One evening, after a brutal week at work, Dave convinced me to join him for a night out. It was the first time I'd really let loose since everything had happened, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of freedom. We were sitting at the bar, swapping stories and reminiscing about old times, when a woman walked over. She was striking, with a confidence that seemed to radiate from her, and a smile that lit up the room. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but it felt good just to talk to someone new. It reminded me of what it was like to have a normal conversation without the weight of betrayal hanging over my head. Her name was Sarah, and she was everything Laura wasn't, open, easygoing, and had this effortless sense of humor that put me at ease right away. We exchanged numbers before the night was over, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of something positive on the horizon. Sarah and I started hanging out, nothing heavy, just a few casual meetups here and there. I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship, but spending time with her felt light, uncomplicated. She didn't know anything about Laura or the mess I'd been through, and honestly, I liked it that way. With Sarah, I could just be myself, the version of me that hadn't been scarred by betrayal. As the weeks rolled by, I found myself healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. Laura stopped dominating every thought. The divorce was finalized, and with that, a sense of closure settled in, a kind of peace I hadn't realized I needed. Life was slowly starting to piece itself back together. Sarah and I kept things light, grabbing drinks, spending lazy weekends together, but without any pressure or expectations. It was exactly what I needed. Then, one evening, as we sat on my couch watching a movie, she turned to me with a look that told me she had something weighing on her mind. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly, her voice serious. "Sure," I replied, not sure what to expect. "Are you over her?" she asked, locking her eyes onto mine. "Your ex. Are you really over her?" I hesitated. I wanted to say yes, to put her at ease, but I knew it wasn't that simple. I was moving forward, sure, but the scars from Laura's betrayal still lingered, buried deep beneath the surface. "I'm getting there," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "It's taking time, but I'm getting there." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, a small, almost hopeful smile tugging at her lips. "Good, because I really like you, Mark. But I don't want to be anybody's rebound." "You're not," I assured her, leaning in just a little closer. "I like you too. I just want to take things slow." Her smile grew a bit wider, a hint of relief shining in her eyes. "Slow sounds good to me." Taking things slow with Sarah turned out to be one of the best decisions I could have made. Every time we spent time together, I felt a little more at ease, a bit more like the person I used to be. There was no rush to define what we had, no pressure to fall into the same traps that had led me down the wrong path with Laura. Sarah was patient, understanding, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Over the next few months, Sarah and I kept seeing each other, staying casual. We enjoyed weekend trips, dinners out, and the occasional movie night at my place or hers. But no matter how good things felt, there were still times when thoughts of Laura's betrayal crept back in, like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. Sometimes, it was just a fleeting moment, a quick flash of a memory, but other times, it hit me like a tidal wave, reminding me of the pain I hadn't quite shaken off. One evening, after a quiet dinner at Sarah's place, I must have let something slip through, even though I hadn't meant to. She had this uncanny way of sensing when something was off, and that night was no exception. She reached across the table, gently placing her hand over mine, concern etched into her features. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then let out a long, heavy sigh, feeling the weight of it all settle in my chest. "It's just, sometimes I still think about what happened. About Laura. I know I'm moving on, but it's like this thing I can't fully shake." Sarah nodded, her expression calm and understanding. "That's okay, Mark. You don't have to rush yourself. Healing takes time." "I know," I murmured, my voice thick with frustration. "It's just, hard. I feel like I should be over it by now." "Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself," she said gently. "What you went through wasn't just some small thing. It's going to take time to work through all of that." I looked at her, her face softened with genuine empathy, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Sarah had this way of making me feel like it was okay to still be hurting, like I didn't have to pretend I was completely put back together just because I wanted to be. "Thanks," I said quietly. "I just don't want to drag you into my mess." "You're not dragging me into anything," she said firmly, squeezing my hand. "I'm here because I want to be. And I'm not going anywhere just because you're not all the way healed yet." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket, easing some of the tightness in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to take my time, that moving forward didn't mean I had to have everything figured out all at once. "Okay," I whispered, giving her a small, tentative smile. "I'm trying, Sarah. I really am. And that's all I'm asking for," she replied softly. "Just keep trying. One day at a time. One day at a time." Maybe that was exactly what I needed to hear. With Sarah's support, I felt the tiniest bit lighter, like the weight of the past wasn't quite as crushing as it used to be. And maybe, just maybe, I'd get through this after all. It was huge. And it's okay to still have moments where it bothers you. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear right then. Sarah never tried to fix me. She just listened. She just understood. And that made all the difference. Even though things were going well between us, I knew deep down there were parts of me that hadn't completely healed. Laura's betrayal had left deep scars, and no matter how much I tried to push forward, they were still there, lingering just below the surface. Sometimes, the weight of it would sneak up on me, like when I'd stumble across something that reminded me of our old life together, a restaurant we used to go to, a song from our wedding, small things that brought everything rushing back. One afternoon, while walking through the city with Sarah, we passed by a cafe where Laura and I had spent so many mornings sipping coffee and talking about nothing and everything. The memories flooded in, uninvited and overwhelming. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. I hadn't told Sarah much about the specifics of my relationship with Laura, just that it had ended badly. I didn't want to burden her with my past. But standing there, staring at that cafe, the weight of it all felt too heavy to keep hiding. "Mark?" Sarah's voice pulled me back to reality. "You okay?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take a deep breath. I nodded, trying to push the memories away. "Yeah, I'm fine." But she saw right through me. "Is it about her? Laura?" I didn't respond right away. Eventually, I nodded. "Yeah. It's just, this place. We used to come here a lot. It's stupid, I know, but..." "It's not stupid," Sarah cut in softly but firmly. It's part of your past. You can't just erase that. I looked at her, a mix of frustration and sadness swirling inside me. I don't want to feel like this anymore, I admitted. Like she still has some kind of hold over me. She doesn't, Sarah said, holding my gaze steadily. You're not with her anymore, and you're building something new now. But healing isn't a straight line, Mark. Sometimes the past comes back up. That doesn't mean you're not moving forward. Her words hit me hard, but in the best way possible. She was right. Just because Laura's memory still haunted me sometimes didn't mean I wasn't healing. I was moving forward, and with Sarah's patience and understanding, I knew I'd keep moving forward at my own pace. I'd spent so much time trying to erase the past that I hadn't realized it wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning to live with it. Laura would always be a part of my story, but she didn't have to define it. Just when I felt like I was finally getting a handle on things, life, as it so often does, threw me a curveball. It happened one Saturday afternoon while I was out running errands. I was at the grocery store, minding my own business, pushing my cart down the aisles, when I turned a corner and, there she was. Laura. I hadn't seen her in months, not since the divorce was finalized. My heart jumped, but not because of any lingering feelings. It was just pure shock. She was standing there in the produce section, casually picking out apples, like she was just any other shopper, as if nothing had ever happened between us. As if the last few years of our lives hadn't been a complete train wreck. For a split second, I froze. It was surreal, almost like seeing a ghost. Part of me wanted to turn around and get the hell out of there before she noticed me. But another part of me, the stubborn part, told me to stand my ground. I wasn't going to run away. I didn't owe her that. She looked up then, and our eyes met. I saw the flicker of recognition, followed by something I couldn't quite read. Was it regret? Sadness? Relief? Whatever it was, it made my stomach tighten. Mark, she breathed out softly, as if testing the sound of my name on her lips. Laura, I replied, my voice strained but steady. I didn't move closer, didn't smile. I just stood there, gripping the handle of my cart a little tighter. There was an awkward pause as we just stared at each other, both unsure what to say. After everything, what words could possibly bridge the chasm between us? How have you been? She asked, her voice hesitant. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How had I been? After everything she put me through? But I bit back the sarcasm and forced myself to stay calm. I'm doing okay. Moving forward. She nodded slowly, chewing on her bottom lip. That's good. I couldn't read her expression, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. I just wanted to get out of there. But before I could find an excuse to leave, she spoke again. I'm really sorry, Mark, she whispered, her eyes dropping to the floor. For everything. Her apology hung in the air between us, heavy and pointless. What did she expect me to say? That it was okay? That I forgave her? I didn't. And I wasn't sure I ever would. I know you are, I replied finally, my voice quiet but firm. But it doesn't change anything. She looked up at me, eyes glistening, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anything, really. And maybe that was a good thing. With a curt nod, I turned away and walked past her, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. There was no point. Whatever closure she was seeking wasn't mine to give. I had my own life to live now. My own path to follow. And I wasn't going to let her derail it again. For a split second, I thought about turning around and leaving before she noticed me. But it was too late. She looked up, and our eyes met. Mark, she said, her voice tinged with surprise. I nodded, trying to keep my composure, even though my heart was racing. Laura. An awkward silence settled between us, the kind that happens when you're face to face with someone who used to mean everything, but now feels like a stranger. She looked different, maybe a little older, a bit more worn down, but I could still see hints of the pain in her eyes, the same pain that once consumed us both. How are you?" she asked hesitantly, her voice cautious. "I'm good," I replied, keeping it short. "You?" She hesitated, then gave a small, half-hearted shrug. "I'm okay. Things have been different." "Yeah, I can imagine," I said, not wanting to dig any deeper into her life. I didn't want to know about Mike or whatever else had been going on since we parted ways. Another uncomfortable pause followed, stretching out until she finally spoke again, catching me off guard. "I've been meaning to reach out," she began slowly, choosing her words carefully, but I didn't know if it would be too much. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely confused. "Reach out? About what?" She glanced down at the apples in her hand, almost like she was trying to gather the courage to continue. I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know it's way too late, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it." Her words threw me off balance. An apology? After all this time? I didn't know how to respond. But as I stood there, taking it all in, I realized something important: I didn't need her apology. I'd moved on, with or without it. "Thanks," I said simply, not sure what else to add. She nodded, a mix of relief and sadness crossing her face. "I hope you're doing well, Mark." For the first time, I really was. "I am," I replied, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. "Take care, Laura." With that, I turned and walked away. No dramatic farewells, no lingering emotions about what could have been. It was just over. And for the first time, I felt genuinely free. That unexpected encounter with Laura brought me a peace I hadn't known in years. It was like the final page of our story had finally been written, and now I could focus completely on what came next. As for what came next, that was Sarah. After everything, she and I had continued to grow closer, and I found myself falling for her in ways I never anticipated. She was everything Laura hadn't been: steady, reliable, honest. With Sarah, there were no games, no hidden agendas. Everything felt easy and natural, in the best way possible. One evening, after spending a particularly wonderful day together, we were lounging on her couch, just talking about life and the future. I hadn't been this open with anyone since Laura, but with Sarah, it felt right. "I've been thinking," she said casually, though there was a hint of seriousness in her tone. "About what?" I asked, curious. "About us." She paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "I know we've been taking things slow, and I'm totally fine with that. But, maybe it's time we talked about the next step." Her words took me by surprise, but in a good way. I sat up a little straighter, giving her my full attention. "What kind of next step are we talking about?" She smiled softly, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "Well, I'm not saying we need to rush into anything, but maybe we could think about moving in together. Or at least start planning for it. I just feel like we're ready for that. Don't you?" I blinked, processing her suggestion. It was a big step. One I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for again after everything that happened with Laura. But looking at Sarah, seeing the hope and sincerity in her eyes, I realized that I wasn't afraid. I didn't have the same doubts and fears that had plagued me before. With Sarah, things felt right. "Yeah," I said slowly, the corners of my mouth turning up in a small smile. "Yeah, I think I'm ready for that too." Her face lit up, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long, long time. It wasn't just happiness. It was hope. Real, genuine hope for a future that didn't involve looking back, only forward. "Really?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement and a little disbelief. "Really," I confirmed, reaching out to take her hand in mine. "I'm ready, Sarah." Let's do it. She squeezed my hand, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen it. Okay, then. Let's take the next step. And just like that, for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't holding on to the past. I was stepping into something new. With Sarah by my side, I finally felt like I was where I was meant to be. Moving forward. Starting over. And this time, I knew I wasn't alone. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The next step. She smiled, looking a little nervous but hopeful. Yeah. I mean, we've been together for almost a year now. Maybe we could start thinking about moving in together. I know it's a big step, and if you're not ready. I interrupted, surprising us both with the certainty in my voice. I've been thinking about it, too. Her smile widened, a wave of relief washing over her features. Really? Yeah, I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. I think I'm ready. For the first time in a long while, I genuinely meant it. I was finally ready to take that step forward, to build something new, something better. Sarah was my future, and I was more than willing to let go of the past. Moving in together felt monumental, but at the same time, it felt easy. By then, our lives had already begun to blend together in so many ways. But now it was official. We started looking for a place that would be ours, something neutral where we could start fresh, free from the shadows of old memories. After a few weeks of searching, we found it. A cozy little apartment on the edge of the city. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it felt just right for us. It had these huge windows that let in tons of natural light, a small but charming kitchen, and just enough space to feel like home without being overwhelming. We signed the lease, and just like that, we had a place we could truly call our own. Moving in was a whirlwind of boxes, unpacking, and laughter. It was nothing like the last time I'd gone through this. When Laura and I had moved in together, everything felt heavy, more like an obligation than something to look forward to. But with Sarah, it was different. Everything felt lighter, like a new beginning. We found joy in the little things, debating over where the bookshelves should go, cooking our first meal together, and even bickering playfully over which way the couch should face. I won that one, by the way. For the first time in what seemed like forever, I was genuinely hopeful about the future. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was living. And a huge part of that was because of Sarah. As the weeks turned into months, we settled into our new life together, finding our rhythm as a couple. We developed these simple routines, making dinner after work, spending quiet Sundays reading or exploring new corners of the city, binge-watching whatever show we were hooked on that week long into the night. It wasn't a dramatic, whirlwind romance like I once thought I needed, but it was real. It was solid. It was exactly what I'd been searching for. One evening, after a long day, we were sitting on the couch, Sarah's head resting comfortably on my shoulder as we half-watched some mindless TV show. I glanced down at her and felt this overwhelming sense of contentment. This quiet, stable love, was what I had been missing all along. Not the intensity, not the chaos of my relationship with Laura, where I was always on edge, never knowing what each day would bring. No, what I had with Sarah was something entirely different. It was calm. It was reliable. It felt like home. I realized then that I didn't need the high drama or the passion that teetered on the brink of destruction. I needed this, a relationship built on trust and mutual respect, one where I felt safe to be myself, flaws and all. With Sarah, there was no walking on eggshells, no fear that I'd wake up one morning and find it all gone. For the first time, I could just be, and that was more than enough. As we sat there, her warmth against my side, I thought about everything it had taken to get to this point. The heartbreak, the mistakes, the lessons learned. It hadn't been easy, and I'd been through more pain than I ever thought I could handle. But looking at Sarah, I knew it had all been worth it. Every step I'd taken had led me here, to this moment, to this woman. And for the first time, I felt grateful for the journey. "Hey," she murmured, looking up at me with those soft, understanding eyes of hers. "What's on your mind?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I said honestly, a smile tugging at my lips. "To have you. To have this." She blushed a little, shaking her head with a laugh. "You're such a sap, you know that." "Yeah, but I'm your sap." She grinned, shifting closer, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her in tight. It wasn't a grand gesture, wasn't some dramatic proclamation of love. It was just a quiet moment between us, and yet it felt more meaningful than anything else I'd ever experienced. "I'm glad you're here, Mark," she whispered softly. "Me too," I whispered back. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by the past. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was present, right here, with the woman I wanted to build my future with. And that was everything. We stayed like that for a long while, the TV buzzing softly in the background, neither of us feeling the need to say more. There was no rush, no pressure. Just the two of us, savoring the simplicity of a love that felt like it had been worth waiting for. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a new, better chapter, one I couldn't wait to see unfold. But this peace, this trust, I hadn't known how much I needed it until I found it. "Hey," I murmured softly, turning to face her. She replied, still focused on the TV screen. "I love you," I said, the words coming out effortlessly, as if they'd always been there, waiting to be spoken. She turned to look at me, her eyes glowing with warmth and affection. "I love you too, Mark." In that moment, it hit me just how far I'd come. The pain from Laura's betrayal, the humiliation of that awful night when everything fell apart, all the months I'd spent wrestling with anger and uncertainty, it was all behind me now. Sure, it was part of my story, part of who I am, but it didn't define me anymore. I had moved on. I had found happiness again, and this time, it was built on something genuine, something real. Every now and then, Laura crosses my mind, but it's not with bitterness or regret. It's more like a distant reflection. What we had is long gone, but I see now how it shaped me in ways I hadn't understood until recently. The hurt, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it forced me to grow, to confront things about myself I didn't want to face. It made me realize what I truly needed in a relationship. I don't hate her anymore. I don't even think about her with sadness. She's just a part of my past that helped lead me to where I am now, a future with Sarah. A future grounded in trust, laughter, and love. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from Laura. It was short, just a brief note saying she'd moved on and hoped I had too. It didn't stir up old wounds or send me into a spiral. It was just a reminder that our paths had finally split for good. I didn't feel the need to respond. I'd closed that chapter a long time ago. Now, sitting here and putting all of this into words, I can't help but reflect on how far I've come. From that night at the party when my world crumbled, to this moment right here, life has taken me down some unexpected roads, but I've come out stronger on the other side. I'm ready for whatever comes next. So, here's to new beginnings. Here's to moving forward. And if you've made it this far, I hope my story has been a reminder that no matter how broken you feel, there's always hope on the other side of heartache. Life has a way of surprising us, of bringing new love, new joy, and a chance to rebuild something even better than what was lost. Thanks for reading, and if you liked this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.